What's up? I got these new lights in my room, and since I'm going to be talking about building a second brain in this video, let's make them green. Today we're going to be talking about Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. This was the first self-improvement book that I read. I found Tiago Forte in Building a Second Brain, I believe, because I was really into like Notion and note-taking and that whole thing, and I was like trying a bunch of different apps and stuff, and then somehow I found the idea of a second brain, and I found out that he had a book, and then I got it for Christmas. So yeah, this was the first self-improvement book that I read. I started it Christmas 2022, and I finished it February 4th, 2023, with some breaks in between. But yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about pretty much my favorite quotes and ideas from this book, not necessarily the things that you would hear normally, like maybe in a book review, because I don't think it's beneficial for me to just talk about the things that everybody talks about. I want to share the things that resonated with me and how they might benefit or resonate with you. So I'm not going to be talking about like the code framework and all that stuff. If you don't know about that, it's basically just a framework that Tiago Forte uses for a second brain. So capture, organize, distill, and express. I'm not going to really be going in depth into those ideas, but more just random quotes and ideas that I pulled from the book that were my favorite. If you want to learn about those, then there are a billion different videos out there about the code framework and the para framework that you can go watch after this. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to start out with some quotes, and then I'm going to go into just bigger ideas. The first quote is, "Failure is just more information to be captured and used as fuel for your next journey." So this idea has always been sort of fascinating to me. The idea that failure, like, you don't need to think of failure as failure. You could just think of it as more information to be captured and more data. Ali Abdaal, I'm about to read his first book that just came out, Feel Good Productivity, and in it he talks about experiments and how you should think of everything as an experiment rather than some system that you have to follow to the T. But if you just think of it as an experiment, one, there's more flexibility, and two, you can't really fail at an experiment. Like science experiments, you can't really fail. Like, sure, maybe your hypothesis was wrong, but that's not really a failure. You just gathered more information. So I think that idea of just, you don't need to think of failure as failure, is just more data, more information to lead you to more success. I wrote down a failure is just unsuccess. I don't know if that's a word, but it's just unsuccess that leads you to more success. So really, it's just success. So that idea of just failure isn't really failure has just always resonated with me. The next quote, "Everything not saved will be lost." This is, I believe, like the Nintendo like save screen or whatever, but I think some people can really take this to the extreme and capture every single thing that they think of or that they find. But really, that's not the point of a second brain. The point of a second brain is to be personalized to you and your brain and your thoughts and ideas and what resonates with you. But if you capture every single thing, all the popular quotes and phrases that maybe other people find it beneficial, but sometimes the popular things aren't necessarily the things that benefit you. So you can take this to the extreme, but if you don't, it is a really helpful reminder. Often, before I had a second brain, I would be maybe like going to bed at night, and I would think of an idea or something I had to remember for the next day, and then I don't do anything. I'll just think to myself, I'll remember it tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow morning comes and I'm mad at myself because I don't remember it. That's a small example, but it really is like where this applies to. If you have an idea, if you have maybe a quote, or maybe you're talking to someone and they say something that really resonated with you and you're like, oh wow, that's actually really helpful, you shouldn't just sit there and hope that you remember it tomorrow. You should take the moment, take the 2 minutes to write it down, because that could spark a whole new journey or project or idea for you, and you don't want to just lose it to the depths. Because imagine how much data and how much information that could lead to amazing projects and ideas. Imagine how much of that would be lost just because you didn't write it down in your notes app. This is why I have a pocket notebook and why I carry this around with me to, capture all these ideas. And when I don't have my pocket notebook, I always have my notes inbox, So the next quote is, "Everything is a remix." I believe this was a heading in one of the chapters about expression. So again, the code framework, the last sort of step is express. So express your ideas. And he talks about everything as a remix. So I think what I took from it is that nothing is original. And that sounds sort of demoralizing, like, oh, I can't be creative, I can't have original ideas, I can't do this, blah, blah, blah. But really, what we think of as original is just making connections. I think that's the big point that he was trying to get across when he was talking about expression and creativity, which actually leads into the next quote. Creativity is about making connections. So because creativity is about making connections, everything that we think of as original and that people have created, they're just connections. There's a part in the book in page 170. I'll just read it here. "I remember the first time someone referred to what I do as your work. It dawned on me that I had a body of work that stood on its own, that had an identity distinct from mine. This is a turning point in the life of any creative professional when you begin to think of your work as something separate from yourself." So this is when he's talking about, everything is a remix. So because everything is a remix and creativity is just making connections, those connections that we make are unique to us because of our experiences in our life that no one else has experienced in the same way that we have. Because we are different and we all have different experiences, we can make different connections that we can then share with others. That idea, just to think of creativity about just connections that arise from you and you seeing connections that no one else can see, just really, really resonates with me and really motivates me to make those connections and to ponder. I'm gonna make a whole video about pondering, but making those connections and expressing them is a really big motivation, especially for me as I'm trying to express my ideas creatively. Okay, so the next quote is, "All you need to do is to listen to what life is repeatedly trying to tell you." This I have definitely experienced a lot. Sometimes I just hear something and I cannot get it out of my brain. To give an example, yesterday at church, the pastor said that our love for God is directly correlated with our obedience to his word. And I've really been thinking about how to love God a lot lately. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, there's the answer. It just sort of clicked for me. Ever since then, I can't forget about it. And a lot of times I hear something in a Sunday sermon and then in youth group and then my mom mentions it, and it's sort of like, okay, I really need to take note of this. I need to remember this. So coming back to the quote, listen to what life is repeatedly trying to tell you. After the third time I've heard it from my mom or like youth group or something, I can realize, okay, let me actually dive into what this means, because clearly it's important, and clearly if so many people are telling me this, clearly it's important. Clearly I have to take note of this and try to apply it to my life. That's another thing about remembering what life is repeatedly trying to tell you. You can't just be like, save the quote in your quotes folder and never get back to it again. If multiple people have expressed that, then you need to take that. It's your job to take that and actually implement it in your life, because clearly it's something important, and clearly you should be trying to implement it because so many people are expressing it out. The next quote is, learning shouldn't be about hoarding stockpiles of knowledge like gold coins. Now, when I first hear this, I think of this as a contradiction to everything not saved will be lost. If you think of everything not saved will be lost, you think, okay, I need to collect. I need to collect my gold coins, right? But then you hear this quote and you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to hoard. So it could be seen as a contradiction to that, but really they sort of go hand in hand, because like I talked about earlier, everything not saved will be lost. That doesn't mean that nothing can be lost. That doesn't mean that everything needs to be kept. It just means that what you want to be kept should be saved. I talked about this earlier, so I don't want to repeat myself here, but they go hand in hand, because everything not saved will be lost is telling you, save what resonates with you, save what shouldn't be lost. And then this quote is saying the same thing. You shouldn't be hoarding random knowledge. This really, really speaks to me, because I'm kind of a hoarder, in digitally and physically. I get emotionally attached to random things. Like, I got, what was it? There was like this styrofoam tube that had like lights in it. It was like a little light stick thingy, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna put this in my room, and I'm gonna take it apart, and I'm gonna get the lights out and stuff like that. But then my sister was like, no, you're not. Like, clearly you haven't. By this point, if you really wanted to do that, you would have done it already. So clearly it's not that important. So just throw it away. Things like that, small things like that, but then they add up. You know, you don't want to have a bunch of random piles of knowledge that you have to sift through just to get to the gems. You should only have the gems. You shouldn't have random knowledge that you don't actually care about. You should have the parts that actually speak to you and that actually you can implement. Just because other people like it, just because it's a popular quote, I kind of talked about this earlier, just because it's a popular quote or idea doesn't mean that you should also be saving it. I wrote here, the kinds of ideas you should keep are the ones that remind you of another idea you know, and the ideas that birth new connections. So again, this connects to what I was talking about with creativity earlier, about how creativity is all about making connections. Those ideas, I experience this a lot when I hear something, and then I think about it a little bit, and I talk with others about it, and then I notice, oh, that reminds me of this idea. And when I hear the words come out of my own mouth or think the words in my own brain, that reminds me of another idea. Those are the ideas that I want to keep and the connections that I want to keep, because those will birth new connections and new ideas. The last quote I have here is, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control the lens we look it through. I heard this quote and it was like a whoa moment. There's also, it's similar to the idea of, I think it's 2 arrows. It's like you get hit by the first arrow and it hurts, right? But then a second arrow comes and you can't avoid it. And if you get hit by it, obviously it hurts if you have 2 arrows in your body. But the second arrow is avoidable, and that second arrow is your response. So the first arrow is something that happens to you, and the second arrow is your response. So this idea that you should always be mindful of how you respond to something and how you observe something and how you interpret an idea is separate from what the actual idea is. So, okay, if you have an idea, let's just call this idea or topic, and then you have multiple different outlooks or views on this idea. So if you have an idea in the middle here, you can have multiple different views, multiple different interpretations of that idea. No one really knows what's inside here, but people just sort of subscribe to these different ideas. This is really big in like Bible interpretation, which I'm not going to get into, but how you respond, this is kind of different to what I'm going to the quote, which I'll get back to, but how you respond and how you interpret an idea is separate from the actual idea itself. So if I go back to this quote, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose the lens we look through. Another way I interpret this quote, again, I'm looking at this quote with different viewpoints and different interpretations, but another way I interpret this quote is maybe, let's say you have a newsletter or something, and alongside your 9-to-5 job, and then you get fired from your 9-to-5 job. You don't like the job that much, but it pays the bills. But you really like writing newsletters, and you've been making sort of you've been making, it's sort of like a side hustle, right? Let's say you get fired from this job. You could see that as, oh, I'm not meant, I'm a failure, you know, I got fired, like, how am I gonna get another job? How am I gonna do this and that? You could see it from that viewpoint. But you could also see it from a different viewpoint of, this is an opportunity to dive into my newsletter maybe, or creation and the other things that I'm passionate about and other things I can make money from. So that is also another way to interpret this quote of, like, depending on how you look at a situation, you can get different viewpoints and opportunities of what you can do as a response to the situation.
Okay, so editing joy here. If the audio quality is bad, it's because I'm using my AirPods. But I wanted to add that another way to implement this is if you're like have an argument. If you're arguing with someone, or let's say someone did something that you didn't necessarily like, but the way you're viewing it is harmful to you, but if you viewed it from their perspective as a secondary viewpoint, if you viewed it from their perspective, then you can see why they would do that and why it would be beneficial for like the bigger picture. So just another example of how this applies, it can also be applied to like if you're mad at someone, like if you're arguing with someone or someone did something and you're not sure why they did it. So the next, I'm going to continue talking about how it's good to know what the different viewpoints are.
And it's very helpful to know what those different viewpoints are. You don't want to just look at something from your own little one viewpoint. You want to broaden your scope and look at it from a bigger picture and know the different viewpoints so that you can find the best case scenario. So those were the quotes that I've liked, and now we're going to get into just the overall ideas, the bigger picture stuff. So the first one is the idea of divergence and convergence. Okay, so when he talks about divergence and convergence, it sort of links together with the code framework. So if we look at this diagram here, it says, it starts with capture and organize. So that's diverging, so it's broadening your scope and getting more information. And then as we sort of distill and express, we converge. So we sort of pinpoint down to a specific idea. I just really like this idea of divergence and convergence because, I don't know, it seems like such a obvious idea, but when I actually think about it, about how, okay, so there's like capture and then there's like distill, sort of comparing and contrasting. There's a quote here where he says, when you distinguish between the two modes of divergence and convergence, you can decide each time you begin to work which mode you want to be in, which gives you the answers to the questions above. Which the questions he had is like, what should you do when you sit down to work? So should you do more research? Should you widen your horizons? Should you start something new? So if you know your divergence and convergence and know where you are in certain projects and sort of ideas, you can decide, okay, this idea has been fully fleshed out and I'm ready to write about it. Whereas this idea, I haven't even started. So if you want to work on this idea, you should probably converge and distill and start to try to express your ideas. But if you're in this idea where you haven't even started, you should diverge and try to capture some information to start your new project. So I think that's really helpful when deciding what you should be doing. Another idea that I like is the Hemingway Bridge from Ernest Hemingway. This is one of his sort of like how he operates when he sits down to work. So the Hemingway Bridge is basically the idea that you should end with the beginning in mind. So let's say you're doing a writing session. You don't want to just end, you want to end with maybe an idea you were thinking about or the current status, where you should be going next, random details that you want to include, so that when you sit down to work, the next session, you don't have writer's block. You can kind of just have a running start, which that just seems like a very efficient way to work, and it feels like I really want to try to incorporate this into my own workflow. So only a few more ideas here. This next one is really interesting to me and I really want to learn more about it. And it's about tacit knowledge and knowing yourself. So this is in pages 232 to 234, which is what I've written down. Tacit knowledge is it's kind of hard to explain, but I think it can be explained as just the thing that separates us from machines and computers. Just a few quotes like, we know more than we can say. We can't really explain tacit knowledge, but we like know it and we experience it, but we can't really explain it. Again, it's what separates us from computers. So machines and AI don't have tacit knowledge. Tiago Forte says, when you encounter an idea that resonates with you, it is because that idea reflects back to you something that is already within you. So what that thing is that's already within you is not only from what you have already collected and your experiences and, you know, what you already know, but also that tacit knowledge. There's a book about it called The Tacit Dimension that I really want to read because this just seems like such an interesting idea. And at the end of this section, he says, you search outside yourself to search within yourself, knowing that everything you find has always been a part of you. That's like, whoa. Like, that connects back to what I just said. Like, that quote, when something resonates with you, it reflects what's already in you. So when you see something that's outside yourself and it resonates you, it's already within you. But you were searching outside of yourself to know what's in you. So when you find something outside yourself, that is actually inside yourself. Because if you resonated with it, you resonated with it because it was already in you. So like, what's outside of you is already in you. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. And it's just a very interesting idea, and it really like blows my mind. It's just so interesting.
Okay, it's editing joy again. Again, I'm using my AirPods, so the microphone quality is bad. But I wanted to say that I got some of this wrong. Tacit knowledge isn't necessarily what makes you resonate with something, or isn't necessarily like in you to like reflect what you already know, like what I'm saying. What I said just now was true. Like when you find like what you find outside of you is actually inside of you because like it reflects what is already inside of you and stuff like that. But tacit knowledge, I've been doing a little bit of research on it, and it is a very interesting topic, and I think I'm going to do its own dedicated video. But essentially, tacit knowledge is like experience and what you learn from experience that you can't explain. So it's what separates a master from a beginner. So there are certain things that the master chef does, certain sort of tendencies and ways to do things that the beginner has no idea what to do. Like there are small things that you can't really explain, but it's part of the process. Like when you're learning a language, there's a whole thought experiment where this guy has a computer with the entire database of the entire Chinese language. Does the combined person and computer know Chinese? When I first heard it, I thought yes, but really no, because languages are so, they change and they're very malleable in a way, and they change and are updated, and you need someone who actually does know Chinese and is culturally and socially involved in the Chinese language to be able to update it. So really the computer doesn't actually know the language, but someone who actually does know is involved in like speaking with others and being culturally involved in the language. So that really is what tacit knowledge is. Again, I'm going to do a whole dedicated video about it. It's very interesting. But back to what I just said, how tacit knowledge, it reflects, or not tacit knowledge, how when you find something outside of yourself, and how he said, when you find something that resonates with you, it reflects what's inside of you. So when you find something outside of yourself that resonates with you, you're actually finding something that's already within you. There's another quote that Tiago Forte says on page 234 in the same sort of section where he says, self-direction is impossible without self-knowledge. So this goes into knowing yourself. You know, the unexamined life is not worth living, and how you can't, when you see something that resonates with you, and if it's true that when something resonates with you, it reflects back what is already in you, if that is true, then you can observe what commonly resonates with you and the patterns between them, and you can see, okay, that is part of me. That is, I can learn from that and learn that that is part of me, and therefore, since I have that self-knowledge, I can self-improve and find my direction and find myself, which I think is a very important thing to like know yourself. So, yeah, that's just an additional quote. He talks about life purpose, and knowing yourself is the biggest, most important thing if you want to find your life purpose and direction. How can you know what you want if you don't know who you are? Like, that is so important. Yeah, like the end of the section, over time you can uncover new layers of yourself and new facets of your identity. You search outside yourself to search within yourself, knowing that everything you find has always been a part of you. So if I take this quote in a different way, I can see that to know yourself, not only with like what resonates with you, but you can search for outside resources to search inside yourself, knowing that everything you find has always been a part of you. So, yeah, just wanted to add that. I think it's very important. Again, I did get some stuff wrong about what tacit knowledge is, and I'm going to do a whole video about it. So, look forward to that and keep watching.
This quote, you search outside yourself to search within yourself, knowing that everything you find has always been a part of you, which connects to when you encounter an idea that resonates with you, it is because that idea reflects back to you something that has already within you. Those two quotes are just, it's just so interesting to me, and I really want to read the Tacit Dimension book because this is just so interesting to me. If you don't really understand what I'm saying, I wouldn't either. I would encourage you to look it up. I know there's a very helpful Wikipedia page on it. Look into this yourself if this sounds interesting, but yeah, this is just very interesting to me. So the next idea is progressive summarization, which is a very simple idea, sort of the main idea when distilling your ideas, which is that we should progressively, every time we sort of touch a note, so every time we encounter a note, we should sort of distill the important parts. So start to bold and highlight the most important parts, so that next time we come, we can just scan over the bold parts and know like what the note is about without actually having to read the entire thing. So those are my favorite quotes and ideas from Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. If you want to get this book, if this sounds interesting to you, I'll have a affiliate link, Amazon affiliate link in the description. If you use that link to buy it, it gives me a little bit of kickback. No extra charge to you. I encourage you to read this book. It's a very interesting book. Even if you don't apply the specific framework, there are still some really interesting ideas to learn about. And yeah, I think I covered everything. If you liked this video and want to see more, then consider subscribing. I will be making videos about books and thinking and diagrams and productivity and all sorts of stuff that I'm interested in. So if you want to see more of that, then subscribe and have a good rest of your day. Bye.